2013, I moved to London and I instantly fell in love. Though it was for some people, it was not too grubby, too greasy, too hectic, too frantic, or too busy for me. Within a year, I vowed to stay forever. In 2021, I packed up my bags and I left. Samuel Johnson said, when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. So what was going on with me? Was I tired of life itself? Had I failed London? Had London failed me? Well, like most things, it's a little more complicated than that. So let's talk about it. If you're a British kid and you weren't born there, I can almost guarantee that London lived in your imagination, even if you never got to visit. EastEnders, The Parent Trap, Paddington, Oliver, the spectre of the Dick Whittington myth lived on in lots of modern media. And as you got older and maybe graduated from uni, employment lived in your tender imagination too. Now, without going into a whole historical spiel, let's just say that my hometown of Coventry wasn't really where it was at. And with a job offer of working in my second favourite dream position, you know, bar world famous West End star, casual, I packed up my bags and I moved to London to work in the book publishing industry. I had 3 housemates, approximately 208 cockroaches, and my whole life ahead of me. I felt like I had really finally made it. The myth of London became a reality for me. The big city where anything is possible. Maybe yours is Dublin or Tokyo or New York or New Delhi, but my myth was London. For a time, London was magic. I went to rooftop parties and learned what bruschetta was and asked everybody I ever met for a coffee. I met people with different opinions to me. I got drunk in famous parks. I went to discounted West End shows and political bookshops and really revelled in that weird sense of belonging that comes from moving through a massive crowd of people all the time. I didn't have much money, but I lived off scavenged launch party food and got all the free books I could ever wish for, which is admittedly what I would have spent any spare money on anyway. I got excited about the prospect of never having to drive or own a house or age, really. Just basically that my life wouldn't follow the trajectory of the people that grew up in my hometown. It wasn't what they had was bad, it was more that I didn't want it. I looked at it and I was like, no thank you. And unlike home, I never got stared at in London for wearing something weird or reading on public transport. And compared to after hours in Coventry, I felt really safe at night, at least felt that way. There was always lights on, there was always a crowd around. Even though I was moving jobs and accommodation pretty frequently, the city itself started to feel like home. But living as the main character has its catches. Of course, if you're the main character, stuff has to happen to you. There has to be peaks and troughs and antagonists and bad fortune and oh, my plotline got twisted. After a rather dramatic breakup, I ended up living the Bridget Jones life for a year, and it soon dawned on me that if I didn't have a partner and I liked privacy, I was not going to be able to ever live alone. That year was filled with not being able to afford public transport, so walking for an hour and 45 minutes to work, selling the DSLR that I filmed videos on for rent money, and missing frequent bill payments. Even now, the peers my age who can afford to live alone are either earning 6-figure salaries, are renting from friends and family at a discount price, or living in like zone 9, which essentially when it comes to commuting might as well be Coventry. When I went back to living with housemates and boyfriends, things got better, admittedly, and I might have been happy, honestly, to rent for the rest of my life had I not consistently found the renting market in London to be precarious, unregulated, and at times downright dangerous. It became clear to live a stable life in London in my 30s, I might have to at some point try to own, and at that point my friendship group started silently separating themselves into 2 categories. Those who would be able to afford to join the property market and those who would have to leave. Now call it circumstance, call it hard work, call it privilege, call it good luck with a backstory. Maybe a combination of all 4, but I started to realise that I had 3 options. Go very Jane Austen and marry well, magically blow up online, or continue to climb the managerial corporate ladder until I reached a point at which they would pay me a livable salary. And as I found out after being a manager several times, spiritually, not a manager, and I felt like working my way through a corporate structure would, one, stop me being able to do the work I was actually good at and I liked, and two, potentially bring on an early midlife crisis. Plus, like, rob me of any spare time I might even have to spend in the city that I loved. So it became evident to me that potentially I would fall into that other category and eventually I would have to leave. This is not a tiny violin moment by any means. I was freelancing on the side, I was side hustling my ass off, I was rising in my career, I was winning awards within my industry. I was literally the definition of on the up, and it boggled my mind that that was still not enough. I was starting to worry that leaving would be harder the longer I left it. In 2017, I fell in love, and in 2019, me and Craig started renting this 60 square feet flat. The smallest I'd rented yet. The bedroom was literally the width of a bed, but it was fine because London is our living room. We're always out anyway. We just sleep here. Cue global meltdown. Spending the best part of a year locked in that tiny flat made me realise how precarious I had made myself. I didn't even have access to outside space unless the law said so. I think the pancetta made a lot of people feel really vulnerable, and I was lucky to not be in a completely precarious position, but it did make me realise that the life that I was building was on sand and not on rock. And while I know that it shouldn't be that way, and I'd like the world to be different, I'd like London to be different, I'm also a big believer in acting on how things actually are, and how things wasn't okay. If London was a person, I wouldn't let him treat me this way. To give you some context about the affordability of London as a house buyer, if I was buying a house in 1969 by some miracle of time travel, I would be paying 1.3 times more than if I was buying anywhere else in the UK. But fast forward to 2016 and I would be paying 2.3 times the average UK house price. Ouch! But does that simply mean that poor people live elsewhere outside of London? Now, this is kind of a bugbear of mine and a weird collective trick in the mind that we default to, but this idea that rich people live in certain areas and poor people live in other areas is very, very simplistic and doesn't lend itself well to progressing any kind of productive class conversation, but that is a conversation for another day. Suffice to say, for a city to be self-sufficient, it has to contain almost all class brackets. And to demonstrate, here is a graph from BBC Bitesize, because it was good enough for my 15-year-old revising self, it's good enough for my 32-year-old self too. Now, from my understanding, English graduate, not geography graduate, this is the kind of mapping system a geographer might use to demonstrate the layout of a city based on affordability and class. You can see outside of the business hub and then the factories, it is common for working class affordable housing to be near those places, and then as you get more affluent, you start living in the middle class areas and the commuter belt. Houses are more spaced out, they might even be, steady on, attached, whereas you might find state-owned housing, poorer quality housing and flats nearer the centre. Now, London doesn't look like that. It looks like this. The model's based on the idea that land value is at a higher price in the centre of the city, but that doesn't mean that people on lower incomes aren't living there. It's just that they can't afford to buy there, and they can't usually afford a very high standard of living. The state of some of the flats in the middle of London that people were living on lower wages than me, I can't even begin to explain, and in some cases imagine, because the state of the flats that I was renting should have been the freaking bottom of the barrel, but the barrel, believe me my friends, goes lower. So when people say I can't afford to live in London, they might be right. There are people that genuinely cannot afford to live in London, but on those same straits, there are people who cannot afford to leave. What they might be more accurately saying and paraphrasing is, I can't afford to live in London at the standard that I expect. And even from a middle class perspective, caring about working in a specific sector or feeling like you may only have skills in a specific sector makes you lower those expectations of standards of living. Because whether real or imagined, a lot of people feel like they have to stay. Previously, because I believed, at least, and part of it is true, is that I could only earn money within my specific industry with my specific skill set in London. That's the only place I could earn that money. That money to me became London pounds. Pounds that I could only earn in London, therefore I could only spend in London. The price of the rest of the country didn't matter. But as I started moving to a more remote way of working, I started freelancing, I started making money on the internet, handing over the majority of my paycheck to a landlord who lived in the Cayman Islands when it wasn't necessary started to feel like a weird choice. Even though I'm not from a wealthy family, I used to joke that my wealth was having two parents that I quite liked who would let me stay in their house again at the drop of a hat. And I think there is a privilege to that. Admittedly, I think I felt more confident in my career, more confident in taking risks. And I genuinely think that that's something that factors into it. But something that I hadn't seen coming was, of course, the pancetta. My parents were COVID vulnerable, which meant for the first time in my life, I didn't have that safety net. I couldn't move home if everything went wrong. And I started to realise how precarious things had got. And in a city where they're selling basic necessities at luxury prices, I had to think about my proximity to wealth realistically, without limiting myself, but also not overinflating the potential of the future. How could I live a life that I was genuinely happy with the resources that I had been given? I started to feel like even though I wanted London, London didn't really want me. And while being the main character had been fun, I started to wonder if being the side character might be a little bit more relaxing. Tiffany Ferg made a really interesting video about the phenomena of trendy cities in the influencer sphere and influencers moving from various capital cities and the location as a big character in their content. Now, the hashtag small town girl moving to the big city is frankly a trope in celebrity interviews at this point, and certainly isn't anything new and was definitely a thing before the internet. But this idea of a location to live in as a backdrop rather than something to immerse yourself in might have some weight to it in this age of social media. Maybe more than ever, we want to have this visually impressive life rather than an aesthetic but ultimately more meaningful one. Another factor I didn't think about until I was researching this video is the aspect of me being a UK resident who would like to stay long term in the UK. So it's not that I'm only financially able to buy at least somewhere in the UK, but that I'm also culturally able to. In the last 20 years, more UK residents have left London than have moved in, which is a fact that blew my mind. Within the same time period, more international migrants moved into London than left. As a result, London has the most culturally and ethnically diverse population in the whole of the country, and I have heard anecdotally from a few people that I've met that they, if they're not white, feel uncomfortable with the idea of leaving London because they feel like or have real examples of facing bigotry outside of London. Not that bigotry doesn't happen within London, but I think there's also a conversation in the queer community around London being both unsafe and also sometimes culturally more safe. Those are aspects of my choice to leave London that I honestly hadn't thought about until it was in retrospect, and it's definitely interesting. We're all clouded by our own experience and our own ego, I guess. And also I think that my ego resisted for a long time letting myself feel like a side character. All the main characters go to the cities, right? Samuel Johnson and his frickin' propaganda quote, "Tired of London, tired of life." Visiting New York gave me a good perspective on this because I realised I didn't enjoy it as much as a lot of other people, and I think it's because I haven't consumed the volume of romanticised content and videos and films and TV shows about the city. Not that that's like, I've been consuming some other crap, don't worry. It doesn't make me morally superior, but I think it's interesting when we think about London as something that is romanticised as well as in real terms very cool. Not wanting to de-romanticise London, but looking at other parts of the UK and wondering why they aren't. We have this trend on social media of like, romanticise your life, and I'm like, romanticise your city. Which is hard when you come from a place where frankly 60s architecture did way more damage to your city than a world war ever could. But if the end result of London is as much a self-fulfilled prophecy as it is an earned supremacy, then surely we can give redignifying the rest of the UK a go. In 2021, I followed in the footsteps of 900,000 other Londoners and left the big city. For context, there's like 9 million people in London, so that's like almost 1 in 9 Londoners left. I've documented glimpses of that on here, but this month is the 2-year anniversary and I wanted to take a moment to reflect on how I genuinely felt about permanently leaving London. Now, well, the story is now I live with Craig in a house that we own. Well, we kind of own it. Like, this step's ours, that step's the bank's, that step's the bank's, that step's ours. The house is only about 4 meters wide. It's a small house, but it's ours. It's honestly the same size, if not a little bit bigger than the house I grew up in. And having lived in London, honestly, it feels like a palace. When we found out the maximum mortgage we could get, it was honestly a kind of a relief because it wasn't a figure that was anywhere near high enough for us to have even afforded a flat in London. And it took away so many shoulda, woulda, couldas for me, you know? It was almost like a weird healing experience. When I overhear people poo-pooing London, I always want to jump to its defense. And I still to this day think it's probably one of the best cities I've ever been to. Controversial, but move over New York, Paris, nah. It's London for me. It's not a mystery to me why people want to live in London. It's more the how that I have questions about. I honestly love my new life outside of London. I learned that making it doesn't mean getting to London, and leaving London doesn't mean failure. I did a very depressing calculation in a slightly sadist moment, and I realised that I'd paid over £65,000 in rent while I lived in London, which is at least 2 down payments on 2 houses. What? So while I want to sometimes feel like a failure, I know that I'm not. The system has failed me. Like, obviously having a massive mortgage isn't the socialist dream. My life isn't completely out of the hands of the bankers, and I'm not looking forward to my fixed term being over, but the idea that one individual can't just like feel like evicting me and then evict me in a couple of months, I can't stress to you how relaxing that is. I genuinely feel like parts of my muscles that have been tense for years have finally released, and I wish that could be there for everybody. I also think that my body is thanking me. I'm a massive yes person, and not living on the doorstep of all of these parties and events and people that I'm just so excited to interact with has made me start focusing on the stuff that I genuinely internally care about. It allowed me to finish working on my poetry collection and release it. I've started moving more, eating better, and genuinely I think probably making better videos. I talked to my patrons of the Gumption Club about this big city phenomenon, and somebody described our country as having a London or nothing mentality, London or split. And I couldn't help thinking how bad that probably is for the country, not just for the individual. Like, are you telling me that the Venn diagram of talented people in the UK perfectly overlaps with the circle of people who would choose a good job in London over living in their hometown or living by the sea or living near a sick parent? Everyone in that talent circle doesn't suffer with anxiety in crowds, or can use often inaccessible transport, or won't fall in love with somebody who can't live in London. Like, art scenes think, yeah, everyone who's supposed to be here is here. Or like businesses think that they're not missing out on any talent pools at all, like they're genuinely reaching their best. Maybe 2020 has shifted things slightly, and I have seen some industries moving towards a less London focused model, but it's kind of, from my view, a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of situation. And there is a rise in remote working, but honestly the extent to which that's going to work is pretty TBC in my head. One gumption said that big cities felt like places where middle of the road career trajectories weren't possible or acceptable. But that whole middle of the road trajectory thing, isn't that what literally the world is built on? And can't you find a joyful life there, or shouldn't you be able to? Don't us all, even the high flyers, owe a majority of the stability of the economy and our communities to people who are compromising or half-assers, or the people who say, I'm fine where I am, that's enough for me? And should that be such a shameful thing? Shouldn't we be able to do that and still have a joyful life? Maybe I'm not a prodigy, maybe I'm not a Matilda, maybe I'm allowed to be ecstatic at having a middle of the road career in a middle of the road town in a middle of the road house. It reminds me a little bit of our struggle with this idea of the perfect body, another myth that's plagued us for a long time. And I think as you get older, or as you start unlearning some of the weird lessons, you start realizing that the perfect body isn't that fun anyway, and actually you're in this body and this one's yours and you've been living in it long enough and it's quite fun and it's quite nice, and I like it just because it's mine. Look, I know I was lucky to make it to London at all. I was lucky to be able to stay as long as I did, and I was also lucky to be able to leave. Sometimes people who have never lived in a big city express to me the worry that they might be missing out. And in some ways, I want to say, yeah, you are. Big cities are amazing. You are missing out, but they're also kind of missing out on you, like their loss kind of thing. And aren't we all kind of missing out on all the places that we're currently not, all the chances, all the moments, because we've traded it for all the places that we've actually chosen to be. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was made possible by the Gumption Club, who tip me per video to make sure these videos keep happening. If you have complicated feelings about big cities, capital cities, and the industrial complex that comes with it, I'm openly inviting you to thought dump in the comments below. I'd love to hear all the different experiences people have had in it, out of it. I want to know it all. Please subscribe if you'd like to be here again, because I'd certainly like to see you. And if you like this video, I reckon you'd either like catching up on some more of my London videos here, or maybe you might like something else, one of these. Thanks so much for watching. Frog Snog out.